recording or not. So hopefully we're recording. And I'm at the end. We've been walking to the right on our small circle for about 20 minutes. And this is where we've been working to strengthen the engagement of the hindquarters, which to me equals stability of the hindquarters. And I mean up here on top of the hindquarters and through the lumbar. So on the small circles, it's naturally going to reduce a little bit of the pushing. So as he slows down, he has a little more time and ability to figure out that his hind legs can go forward. It takes some of the pressure off of the SI joint that's been under stress because of the backwards disengagement and the lateral disengagement, frankly, too. So he was unstable in his pelvis left to right, and when he drops his back, that's the over-curling of the neck, he also pushes the pelvis a bit backwards, or you could say down in front, up behind, which puts the hind legs kind of stuck in a position too far behind the torso to really control propulsion and body weight. So especially with this horse, because using any rein contact, like I have the lightest rein contact just to stabilize the neck as we go around on our small circle. He mostly follows my seat, so I can focus on the neck being straight and the saddle being level as we make our way around the circle. And by going this slow, taking these small strides behind and being careful and slow, he stabilizes the pelvic bones. And when you don't see the top of the hindquarter moving, when you can see visual movement up here on top of the hindquarter, you'll see the neck also curls, or he chomps the bit, or he shows signs of trying to gain his stability through the front end. As the pelvis gets more and more stable in its relationship to the sacrum and the lumbar, the less the pelvic bones move, the more the hip joint is free, which means the hind legs can swing easier forward and back. I know, and you had an itch and it threw you out of balance. So we're just going to do about 5 more minutes this way. This is the end of one direction. And it's still that 20 minutes that it takes him to even get to this point. And the amount he's still curling his neck, the slowness of the pace, all of that, plus the forces I feel under the saddle trying to throw me to the left, and I have to put effort into sitting to the right. All of that tells me this is not a finished product yet. He's not engaged enough or stable enough in his engagement to go out on a straight line without falling forward. So this size circle, as long as the midline is straight and level, it keeps encouraging more and more pelvic stability and more forward placement of the hind legs. So that lengthening of the neck is the direct result of his pelvis, lumbar, and sacrum stabilizing. So if the lumbar sacrum portion, so basically from here to here is the lumbar and sacrum, and the pelvic bones start here at those 2 knobby bones on top of the hindquarter, and run either side with the bottom of the pelvis either side of the tail at what looks like the top of the hind legs. So any bony movement we see in that area on top of the hindquarters is what I consider disengagement of the hindquarters, because the more the pelvic bones move, the more stress is on that SI joint, and the more stress is on that stable relationship to the sacrum and the lumbar. And so for horses, if the pelvis is disengaged, which is functional as well as a skeletal coordination, then they can't control their speed. So they either refuse to go forward or they rush really fast. In his case, he used to just go faster and faster because he couldn't control a slow speed. And he, when I started with him, definitely could not turn on a circle this small. This is a big advancement. So we've worked on it, and we're almost to the point where I feel like he stabilized that engagement enough that I could start challenging it as soon as the weather allows with some trot work, walk, trot transitions, walk, trot, halt transitions, and going out on a bigger path of travel. And I tried it before, going out on a bigger path of travel, but he really struggled with that under saddle. He does much better under saddle with my weight as a resistance and my aids. He gets much more stable in the hindquarters and freer through the neck and shoulders if we just work on this little circle for now. And he's very close to sort of graduating this exercise and moving on. So you can see when the neck gets long and the mouth gets quiet, his hindquarter behind the saddle looks level and looks like it's not moving. Right? So the more visible movement, either side to side tilting or one side higher than the other, or a lot of rolling through the pelvis or even up and down movement of the pelvis, all of that speaks to instability, and instability equals disengagement as far as the function goes. They can't use the hindquarter for the main purpose it was intended, which is managing, not only generating forward propulsion, but managing the forces of motion as well as managing internal body weight. So we'll do a couple more minutes this way. And so on the days that I can't ride, I throw Rafalko on the long reins, and we're working on large circles, but on the long reins without weight on his back. And he's not very good at them yet, because as soon as I make the circle bigger, he loses the pelvic stability that we gain on the little circle. So most of our work is still on these little circles, and rein resistance was just sort of not an option. It triggered him into over-curling the neck, and that triggered him into dropping the back, which gives you a backwards disengagement of the pelvis. So the little circle is a rein substitute, so I don't have to put any pressure in his mouth. He can be on a long, loose rein. And what I find is in his best steps, when he really re-engages the hindquarter and finds that stability, he lengthens his neck into a very light but definitely connected contact. Kind of like that. And it doesn't last long yet. So what that tells me is he's a bit of a hypermobile horse, which just means he's kind of loosey-goosey and flexible. And so rebuilding those core muscles and the stabilizing use of the muscles through his hindquarter and back has been very difficult for him. So he had big dramatic movement, but no ability to really control it. So it was long, fast, and flat, and had no suspension. And he had lost all of his agility, so he couldn't even track a circle this small without a whole lot of stress when I first started working with him. So now at least he's good enough at it. He's not all that stressed, but you can still see the neck curling, the neck lengthening. Sometimes the mouth gets busy. Sometimes he takes a misstep. As soon as he's distracted, he completely loses his balance. I got to get his mind back in the game. And so that's the end of 30 minutes on this direction. And then we're just going to change direction gradually. And we're going to look at the beginning of 30 minutes, right? So the first part on a change of direction, you're essentially starting over, just like a warm-up. And that's the reason I leave him on one direction right now for 30 minutes, and then I do the other direction for 30 minutes. And so when we change direction, he might lose a little bit of that hindquarter stability that we just worked so hard to gain. So you'll see me, I have to use the rein a little more because he's not turning, even to the point that I bend the neck, just a little. And then I want to get the neck straight. So again, as soon as we change direction, and this is his harder side, we lose a lot of stability through the hindquarters. I feel that because it reverberates up the back and under the saddle, and then I see in front of me the neck curls, his mouth gets busy, he doesn't follow my seat as well, I have to use a little bit more rein for steering. All of that is because he lost stability through the hindquarters. So to me, the term engagement means the pelvic bones barely move. Visibly, we can't see them move at all. I'm sure there's a measurable amount of movement, but not so much that we see the top of the hindquarters moving a lot. And it's really the same through the back. So those portions of the spine, the lumbar and the sacrum, and then the pelvis, are supported with a lot of white tissue, more than muscle, around the bones themselves, which sort of tells us both the soft tissue as well as the size and density of those larger bones tells us that mechanically that area of our horse's body is really meant to be incredibly stable, that's what helps them offset sort of that weight and mass of this long neck and heavy head that doesn't have a leg out in front of it. So they're kind of table shaped with a long lever and a heavy weight at the front end. So the job of the hindquarters is almost, you can think of it, the engagement is sort of resisting the extra weight and the extra force of that long neck and heavy head. It's resisting the body weight falling forward, and it's stabilizing with every stride. He pushes and generates propulsion, but then on the alternate side of the same stride, he has to resist the propulsion somewhat, or we would fall over. So balance is always equal parts mobility and stability. And when I started with him, he had navicular and ring bone because he had been using the areas of the body that were meant to be mobile, he was using for the purpose of stability, which automatically tells me that the areas of the body, like the lumbar, sacrum, and pelvis, or the hindquarter, which are designed for stability, they're too mobile. So the more mobility we see behind the saddle on top of the hindquarters, the more they have to cheat with the neck, the more stressed they get through the front legs, through the jaw, through the TMJ, the more they hate the bit, the more they, do all these funky things with their head, neck, and shoulders. Because the body has to stabilize somewhere. And so when the lumbar, sacrum, and pelvis is disengaged, it's unstable. And if it's unstable, which was supposed to support stability of the whole body, then someplace else has to instantly stabilize or be restricted, or we're out of control, or maybe falling over. Because if we had mobility everywhere in the body at the same time, those are horses that tend to bolt and panic and run away. And the horses that are almost so unstable everywhere that they tighten down all their muscles for the sake of stability, those are the horses that don't like moving forward, and we call them lazy. But they're just unstable under all that muscle and tight through the muscle, so moving itself becomes uncomfortable, and they resist it and avoid it. This slow speed that Rafalko is choosing on our small circle is the speed right now at which he can keep the pelvis mostly stable and the lumbar mostly stable. This direction, with all that curling of the neck and the busyness of the mouth, is just him telling me, and I can feel it through the movement, that this side is a little harder for him to coordinate. This side is just a little more difficult to find and maintain that stability of the hindquarter, right? So he's more easily distracted, he fusses a lot more, he curls his neck a lot more, he tries to stop a lot more, I need the rein to turn him a lot more compared to the right, right? The right, going right is still a work in progress, but going left is a little bit behind going to the right. Also a work in progress, but not quite as easy for him yet. So now, as we're about a little over 5 minutes into it, he's starting to find moments of stability underneath me and behind me. And so he starts exploring. Ooh, I think I could lengthen my neck. I don't think I need my neck in order to feel stable. Okay? So little by little, I showed the last 10 minutes on the easier direction, and I'm going to show the first 10 minutes on the harder direction. And that's sort of the beginning and the end of the ride in a nutshell, because whenever you change direction, you're sort of challenging the balance of the body. And you can use that positively, or it can become a negative thing. It just means that changing direction a lot, we and our horses have to kind of recalibrate our coordination and our balance on different directions. When we adjust speeds, when we go from walk to trot to canter, if the skeletal coordination is really stable and strengthened muscularly, then it's not that big a deal to change speeds from walk to trot to canter, and you're less likely to lose balance compared to changing direction, which I know is kind of the opposite of what everybody assumes. But that's, as far as skeletal coordination goes, changing direction is much more challenging than changing speed. So here, all these different ways he uses his neck, and I'm alternating the left and right rein because as soon as he gets distracted, he tries to bend his neck, right? Which makes the back and the pelvis unlevel, which is one type of disengagement, right? So I need him to keep his neck straight and his back level while we track around this little circle. That's better. So the stability through the hindquarters is gently starting to come through. And again, I feel his neck lengthen and he gently relaxes into a rein contact. It only lasts 2-3 strides, like it was just sort of at the bottom of that circle. And then he wobbles again, loses it, we have to get it back. So he finds it and loses it, he finds it and loses it, and that's just how it goes as we're building up a new coordination skeletally. And even if he walked this circle perfectly, I can look at his body and go, we still need to develop a little bit more muscle to support that. So that's why it's still tenuous, even though he finds the good steps in every ride now. And he starts off better every ride with less sort of instability and more stability through the back and hindquarters. It's still a matter of strengthening muscle, strengthening muscular support on top of making it kind of a habit in the nervous system, which is what coordination is. So in order to build the right muscles, we first have to alter the skeletal coordination. And that has nothing to do with speed. And so people look at these very slow walks on little circles and they think, that looks easy, doesn't look that hard, and it's very hard. It's sort of the equivalent of, if you've ever done Pilates, one of the hardest exercises in Pilates is called plank. And you're not moving. You don't look like you're doing anything. But because you're using isometric muscle use, you're using a resistant engaged tension in the muscle, it's quite a workout, and it builds quite a bit of core strength. And that's what these slow, purposeful, accurate circles are for all the muscles of his core, right? That support the pelvic stability, that support the pelvis's relationship to the sacrum and the lumbar, that supports the stability of the lumbar and the thoracic, which is your entire rib cage, and then right through the shoulders, up through the neck to the head. So that whole axis, that whole midline of our horse, if it shakes, if it's noodly, if it rolls, if it pulls like that and pushes, that's a loss of stability in the very area of our horse's body that is meant to be incredibly stable. And that's pretty good. So after that little wobble, he pulled it back together. His neck lengthened, he took a light contact, and now he's already back into wobbling a little bit. So I think that's about 20 minutes total. And again, after the first 10 minutes going this way, it begins to smooth out. He begins to have a few good steps. So I would call that reasonable, like he's most of the way there, really changing from a disengaged state of the hindquarter to an engaged state. And that not only is directly related to speed, it makes lifting his back infinitely easier because he has that support and that stability through the pelvis, sacrum, and lumbar. So lifting the thoracic spine, what we call lifting the back, will be that much easier because his hindquarters are supporting that during motion. So I think I'll leave off there. We're right in the middle of a big struggle-y moment. Hang on. See if he can walk through that struggle. Yeah. And there, he re-engages. So that's how fast the disengagement and the engaged steps kind of come and go. I can feel it behind me, I can feel it underneath me, and then I can see it. I can see the result of the instability or stability in how he chooses to use the neck and how easy he is to steer. So we will end there for our little training video.